Let me ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly before your brain has a chance to run its usual interference. Would you buy a Chinese car? I put that question to people on the street earlier this week, and here is what I discovered. People on the street are far less predictable than people on the internet. On the internet, the consensus, particularly among the petrol-head demographic, the torque-obsessed, the people who use the phrase driving experience without irony, is a fairly firm no. Chinese cars? Too plastic, too software glitchy, too Chinese. On the street? Completely different story. Young people particularly, they wanted to know more. They asked about the range, the price, the warranty. Two of them had already looked at BYDs online. One woman told me she'd been quoted for a BYD Sea Lion 7 and was waiting on her finance approval. She was not sheepish about it. She was excited. And that gap between the confident dismissal of the commentator class and the quiet, practical curiosity of the actual buying public is the gap that is going to bury some of the most famous automotive brands in the world if they don't start paying attention. Because here is the headline this story builds toward, verified by sales data that carries all the emotional weight of a quietly placed coffin lid. In 2025, BYD outsold Tesla in pure electric vehicles by more than 600,000 units. Not in China, globally. BYD delivered 2.25 million battery electric vehicles. Tesla delivered 1.64 million. The gap has widened every quarter since. By 2025, BYD had also crossed the $100 billion revenue threshold, surpassing Tesla's annual revenue for the first time. The company that Elon Musk laughed at in 2011.
Competitors now ramping up, and as you're familiar with BYD, which is also on the West Coast, I think they're ramping up production of their electric vehicles. Warren Buffett owns 10%.
I have never in my life felt more privileged to be associated with something than I feel about BYD.
I think they're ramping up production of their electric vehicles. Warren Buffett owns 10% stake in that. Why do you laugh? BYD is trying to compete. Why do you laugh?
Yeah, I know it looks like a miracle and it looks like Warren and I have gone crazy, but I don't think we have. Well, one of us at most.
When a journalist mentioned BYD's name and Musk responded with literal on-camera laughter, now makes him look like the punchline. But before we get to the punchline, we need to understand the entire joke. And this joke started in 1966 in a very poor farming village in Anhui province, in a house with 8 children and not enough food. Part 2. The Man from Anhui, a founder's story. Wang Chuanfu was born on the 8th of April 1966 in Wuwei County, Anhui province, which is, to put it politely, not the address anyone gives when they are asked where the next great industrial titan comes from. Anhui in the 1960s was a province still scarred by the famines of the Great Leap Forward. The Wang family was a farming family, 8 children, no margin, the kind of household where enough is a word that describes aspiration rather than reality. And then, because the universe has a particular sense of dramatic irony, Wang Chuanfu's father dies when the boy is 13. His mother collapses in a field and dies 2 years later. The 8th child of a peasant farmer, now an orphan at 15, is taken in by his elder brother and sister-in-law, who move cities, sacrifice their own ambitions, and dedicate themselves entirely to making sure the youngest gets to finish school. Wang Chuanfu repaid that sacrifice in the only currency he had access to, his brain. He became the first student from his rural school to enter university. He studied metallurgical physical chemistry at the Central South University of Technology, graduated in 1987, then earned a master's degree from the Beijing Non-Ferrous Metals Research Institute. He became a researcher, then a manager. He was good at both. In 1993, he joined a battery company in Shenzhen, the city that the Chinese government had in 1979 quietly designated as a special economic zone and essentially told to figure out capitalism on its own. Shenzhen started as a fishing village of 30,000 people. Today, it has 17 million. It also birthed in fairly rapid succession Huawei, Tencent, ZTE, DJI, and BYD. The city was not just China's Silicon Valley, it was China's entire economic imagination compressed into one city-sized experiment. In 1995, at the age of 29, Wang Chuanfu borrowed the equivalent of roughly $40,000 from his cousin Liu Xiangyang, rented a workshop in the Shenzhen suburb of Buji, hired 20 workers, and formally registered Shenzhen BYD Battery Company Limited on the 10th of February 1995. The name, officially, stood for Build Your Dreams. Wang Chuanfu would later joke with the dry humor of a man who has earned the right that it also stood for Bring Your Dollars. Part 3. The Genius of Doing It the Cheap Way. Here is where the BYD story diverges from the mythology we usually construct around great industrial companies. We like to tell the founding story of companies like this in terms of brilliant proprietary innovation, the lone genius, the eureka moment in a garage, the technology that nobody else had thought of. BYD's early years are not that story. They are something more interesting. Wang Chuanfu looked at the rechargeable battery market in the mid-1990s and saw a very specific opportunity. Japanese companies, Sony and Sanyo primarily, were the world leaders in nickel-cadmium battery production. They made them using highly automated, expensive assembly lines. The batteries were excellent. They were also priced as though they were made of something more precious than nickel and cadmium. Wang's insight was elegantly simple. The automation that made Japanese batteries so expensive was not the source of their quality. It was the consequence of Japanese labor costs. In China, at that moment, labor costs were a fraction of Japan's. You did not need an automated assembly line to produce high-quality batteries. You needed a semi-automated one, which Wang built himself from technical drawings, and a very large number of workers paid competitive Chinese wages, which he had. This approach, replacing capital-intensive automation with labor-intensive precision, sounds almost embarrassingly obvious in retrospect. It was not obvious to anyone else who was trying to compete with Sony and Sanyo at the time. Wang built his batteries by studying the Japanese ones, reverse engineering them, improving where improvement was possible, and delivering a product that matched Japanese specifications at a fraction of the cost. By the year 2000, BYD was producing 4,000 battery cells per day and had become the world's largest manufacturer of batteries for mobile phones and laptops. Its client list included Motorola, Nokia, Sony Ericsson, Dell, and Samsung. The company that Japanese giants Sony and Sanyo tried to sue for intellectual property theft, unsuccessfully because the improvements were genuine improvements rather than direct copies, had eaten their lunch using their own ingredients. In 2002, BYD went public on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Wang Chuanfu's net worth began its journey toward the stratosphere. Part 4. The pivot that terrified everyone, including his own investors. In 2003, Wang Chuanfu did something that caused BYD's share price to drop 31% in 3 days. He bought a car company. Specifically, he bought 77% of Xi'an Qinchuan Automobile, a struggling state-owned factory producing a single, unloved model loosely based on a Suzuki Alto platform for what the company's own investors described as a symbolic amount. The factory was producing one car. The car was not popular. Nobody asked for this. Wang's logic was, as usual, almost irritatingly straightforward. BYD was the world's biggest battery company. Batteries were the hard part of electric vehicles. If you can make the hard part, and you own a factory capable of stamping out bodies and bolting wheels on, you are basically already in the car business. The only thing stopping you is the arrogance of thinking that car manufacturing requires some form of magic that other industries do not possess. The early BYD vehicles were not magic, let's be honest. They were highly pragmatic. The BYD F3, released in 2005 and priced at roughly $8,750, looked, and this is being polite, very much like a Toyota Corolla. A legend within the company holds that Wang drove up to the factory gates in a brand new Mercedes S-Class, handed the keys to his engineers and said, "Disassemble this. Every screw." And to prove his seriousness, he ran a key along the bodywork right in front of them, making a large scratch. The car they would build, he was saying, was going to come from understanding what the best cars in the world actually were. The BYD F3 became China's best-selling car. It sold over 100,000 units in its first year. The F3DM, released in 2008, was, and this is a genuinely remarkable historical footnote that did not get nearly enough attention at the time, the world's first mass-produced plug-in hybrid vehicle. Tesla was still building battery-powered versions of the Lotus Elise and presenting them as the future. BYD had already built a car that could run on electricity alone for 60 kilometers and then switch to a petrol engine when the battery ran out. The car industry largely ignored it. The Chinese public mostly did not buy it, put off by the price premium. 8 years before the plug-in hybrid went mainstream globally, BYD had already done the engineering. Part 5. The Buffett endorsement and why it mattered. Late 2008, the global financial system was in the process of doing its best impression of a controlled demolition. Bear Stearns had already gone. Lehman Brothers was gone. Banks were failing across the Western world with an almost metronome-like regularity. And Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha, the man whose investment philosophy has approximately as many devoted followers as some organized religions, was on the phone with his friend and business partner, Charlie Munger. "Munger, we've got to buy BYD. This guy runs it better than Thomas Edison." Buffett had been introduced to BYD by Munger, who in turn been introduced by the Seattle-based fund manager Li Lu. Munger, who was not given to hyperbole as a general rule, compared Wang Chuanfu to a combination of Thomas Edison and Jack Welch, an inventor with the operational effectiveness of one of America's great corporate executives. In September 2008, Berkshire Hathaway, through its Mid-America Energy subsidiary, invested $230 million for a 9.89% stake in BYD at $1 per share. Berkshire would eventually sell portions of that stake at prices exceeding $30 per share. The total profit on the investment has been estimated at more than $1.3 billion, with Berkshire still holding a significant portion of the original shares at the time of Munger's death in 2023. Charlie Munger described it at various investor meetings as one of the most satisfying investments of his career, not merely for financial reasons, but because of what it represented. A man born into poverty, orphaned as a teenager, who built something the world genuinely needed. The Buffett-Munger endorsement did something very specific for BYD beyond the capital injection. It gave the company Western credibility at the precise moment when it needed to be taken seriously as more than a Chinese copycat operation. When Warren Buffett buys 10% of your company, the commentary class stops laughing. Part 6. The Dark Years and the Comeback Battery. Not everything went smoothly. Between 2017 and 2019, BYD suffered what Wang Chuanfu himself later described as the company's darkest moment. The Chinese government had been generously subsidizing electric vehicle purchases and production through a system that dated back to 2009. The combined value of those subsidies, tax exemptions, buyer rebates, R&D programs, infrastructure funding has been estimated at over $230 billion between 2009 and 2023, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. This was an extraordinary level of state support, and it had an extraordinary effect. It created the world's largest and most sophisticated electric vehicle market, almost by government decree. But in 2019, those subsidies were sharply reduced. BYD's net profit dropped to 1.6 billion yuan, a fraction of its previous level. The company was, according to Wang's own account, focused entirely on survival. Its plug-in hybrid technology, which had been the company's supposed signature advantage, was not landing with consumers. The cars were twice the price of comparable petrol vehicles and did not deliver enough of the electric driving experience to justify the premium. After 19 years of development, BYD's plug-in hybrid division was generating neither profit nor enthusiasm. Wang Chuanfu's response was not to retreat. He invested 8.4 billion yuan in research and development during the crisis. In 2020, BYD unveiled the Blade battery. The Blade battery is a lithium iron phosphate (LFP) cell redesigned from the ground up in terms of form factor. Instead of conventional cylindrical or prismatic cells packed into a battery module, which is then assembled into a pack, the cells themselves become part of the car's architecture. The design is stiffer, more space-efficient, and dramatically safer than conventional lithium-ion packs. To demonstrate the safety advantage publicly, BYD published a video of the infamous nail puncture test, the automotive equivalent of Russian roulette for batteries, in which a metal spike is driven through the cell to simulate catastrophic damage. A conventional lithium-ion battery, pierced this way, typically catches fire within seconds. BYD's Blade battery in the same test produced no fire, a modest temperature rise, and then nothing. At a moment when news cycles were full of stories about electric vehicles spontaneously combusting, a perception problem the entire electric vehicle industry was suffering from, BYD had produced verifiable photogenic proof that its product was safer. The Blade battery changed the competitive landscape. It also changed BYD's financial position. It went from survival mode to dominance mode with a speed that left competitors struggling to articulate what had just happened to them. Let me walk you through what BYD is currently doing in terms of product, because this is where the story gets properly strange. I want you to understand not just that the cars exist, but that they exist at these prices, with these specifications, because the pricing is where the Western automotive industry's pain is located. The BYD Dolphin Mini is a small electric city car priced between 20,000 and 25,000 Canadian dollars. At that price, you get sharp angular headlights that look like a car costing 3 times more, flush door handles of the type usually reserved for cars above $50,000, a 10.1-inch touchscreen that physically rotates between landscape and portrait mode, 38 kilowatt hours of battery, giving you over 300 kilometers of real-world range, fast charging that replenishes a week's commuting in roughly 30 minutes. These are not stripped-out budget specifications. They are, in many cases, the specifications of cars priced at $40,000 and $45,000 from legacy European manufacturers. They just cost half as much. The BYD Han EV is a long, low, genuinely elegant luxury sedan going head-to-head with BMW and Tesla at 45,000 to 50,000 Canadian dollars. Its drag coefficient is 0.23, meaning it cuts through air with almost no resistance. The performance version produces over 500 horsepower. It goes from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 3.9 seconds. The battery holds 85.4 kilowatt hours and delivers up to 701 kilometers of range, which is, to be direct, a figure that several cars costing twice as much cannot match. Inside, a 15.6-inch rotating touchscreen, quilted leather, heated and ventilated and massaging seats, front and rear, a 12-speaker surround sound system, genuine limousine-level rear legroom, and 11 airbags as standard. For $50,000, Competitors charging $70,000 and $80,000 for similar specifications should feel at a minimum mildly embarrassed. The BYD Shark 6 is a plug-in hybrid pickup truck starting at 55,000 Canadian dollars. Canada loves trucks. The Shark 6 runs a 1.5-liter turbocharged engine alongside dual electric motors producing 430 combined horsepower and 650 newton-meters of torque. It out-accelerates a Ford Ranger Raptor to 100 kilometers per hour. It gives you 100 kilometers of pure electric range for daily driving and around 800 total when the petrol engine joins. The truck bed has vehicle-to-load power outlets for tools and appliances. At $55,000, it costs half of a Rivian and is arguably more practical for most actual truck users' actual lives. The BYD Sea Lion 7 is a family SUV producing 523 horsepower in all-wheel drive trim, accelerating to 100 in 4.5 seconds, quicker than most sports cars from a decade ago, from inside a 5-seat family vehicle. It charges at 230 kilowatts. Walk in, order a coffee, walk back out, add 200 kilometers. The 50-inch augmented reality heads-up display is wide enough to feel like it is part of the actual road in front of you. Napa leather, 128-color ambient lighting, 12 speakers, $55,000. The BYD Yangwang U8L is where the story stops making sense by any conventional measure. This is a full-size luxury SUV with 4 completely independent electric motors producing 1,080 horsepower and 1,280 newton-meters of torque, launching its 3,600-kilogram body to 100 kilometers per hour in 3.5 seconds. Each of the 4 motors operates independently, meaning if you blow a tire at highway speed, the car reads the situation in milliseconds and redistributes power across the remaining 3 wheels. You continue in a straight line. The car can perform a complete 360-degree tank turn on dry pavement. It has an emergency float mode for deep water, suspension raises, windows seal, and the spinning wheels act as paddles, and it drives itself back towards solid ground. There's a DJI drone launch pad integrated into the roof. A satellite phone is built into the dashboard. Second-row passengers have zero-gravity captain's chairs with 18-point hot stone massage. This costs approximately 200,000 Canadian dollars. For context, a Rolls-Royce Cullinan costs more. The Maybach GLS costs more. This car, at its price point, is genuinely competitive with the top tier of global luxury SUV production. Its country of origin is somewhere that most luxury SUV buyers would not have associated with this product category 5 years ago. The BYD Yangwang U7 is the car that makes the U8L look like the warm-up act. 1,341 horsepower, 4 independent wheel motors, a drag coefficient of 0.195, making it one of the most aerodynamically efficient road vehicles ever produced. Range of over 1,000 kilometers on a full charge, Toronto to Montreal and back without stopping. 0 to 100 in 2.9 seconds. The Bugatti Chiron, which costs $5 million, does it in 2.4 seconds and seats 2 people. The U7 seats 5, has a boot, and starts at 120,000 Canadian dollars. The U7 can park itself by moving completely sideways. All 4 wheels turn to 90 degrees and the car crabs laterally into a space. It can spin on its own axis. The DUSZ suspension system, which replaces conventional shock absorbers with electromagnetic actuators, can independently raise and lower each wheel with sufficient speed and precision that the car can perform a 4-wheel jump, lifting all 4 wheels simultaneously off the ground. This is a production car. It is road legal. It can hop. These 8 vehicles, from the $20,000 city car to the 1,341 horsepower sedan, represent a product range that no single traditional manufacturer has assembled within this same family at these prices in this time frame. The German manufacturers took 50 years to build their reputations. The Koreans took 20. BYD's passenger vehicle division is by calendar age 22 years old. Part 8. The supply chain that nobody else has. To understand why BYD can price its vehicles the way it does, you need to understand something that the automotive industry calls vertical integration, and which BYD practices to an extent that makes most other manufacturers look like they are assembling flat-pack furniture from someone else's factory. Wang Chuanfu's operating philosophy, except for the tires and the glass, everything else is made in-house, is not a marketing slogan. BYD manufactures its own batteries, its own electric motors, its own semiconductors, its own steel, its own seats, its own air conditioning systems, its own onboard computers. The company employs over 900,000 people as of 2024, including more than 104,000 in research and development alone. For perspective, that research and development headcount is larger than the entire workforce of several traditional automotive manufacturers. The battery advantage is the most consequential. China currently controls over 3/4 of the world's battery production capacity. It processes and refines the essential battery chemicals, lithium, cobalt, graphite, at scales and costs that no other country or company can currently match. BYD, as both a battery manufacturer supplying itself and a vehicle manufacturer consuming those batteries, captures the margin at both ends of the transaction. When the cost of batteries falls, which it has from $151 per kilowatt hour in 2022 to approximately $110 per kilowatt hour by 2025, BYD benefits more directly than any competitor that buys batteries from an external supplier. In China, as a direct consequence of this cost structure, electric vehicles are already 14% cheaper than equivalent internal combustion engine vehicles. In Europe and North America, where the same cost arithmetic applies in manufacturing, even if retail tariffs obscure it, BYD can price its EVs at levels that leave traditional manufacturers facing a choice between matching the price, which destroys their margins, or defending a quality and brand premium that, in the view of an increasing number of actual buyers, no longer justifies the cost difference. The British consumer research from AutoTrader reveals the specific nature of the brand loyalty problem for legacy manufacturers. Among buyers of internal combustion engine cars, over 40% continue to buy from the same brand. Loyalty is alive and real, but among EV buyers, that loyalty drops to 19%. People shopping for their first electric vehicle are not pre-committed to the brand they have driven for 20 years. They are starting fresh, evaluating specifications and price as first principles, and finding that the specifications on the BYD are very good and the price is considerably lower. The Ford Mustang Mach-E was the most considered electric vehicle on AutoTrader in 2021. By 2022, it had fallen to third place. It has since exited the top 10. The Volkswagen ID.3 debuted in third place in 2021 and has not reappeared in the top 10 since. EV buyers, it turns out, fall in love with whichever shiny new thing arrives next, and the Chinese manufacturers have proven with an industriousness that is objectively impressive that they are very good at producing shiny new things. Part 9. The European Wall and the Geopolitical Game. Of course, none of this is without friction. Enormous friction, in fact, the geopolitical variety, which is considerably harder to design around than the aerodynamic variety. In September 2023, the European Commission launched an investigation into Chinese electric car manufacturers, alleging that state subsidies had allowed Chinese producers to price their vehicles at levels that constituted unfair competition. This was not an entirely inaccurate allegation. The Chinese government had invested, by CSIS estimates, over $230 billion in EV and battery sector support between 2009 and 2023, through mechanisms including tax exemptions, buyer rebates, research grants, and infrastructure funding. In 2020 alone, BYD received the equivalent of 2.1 billion euros in Chinese state subsidies. In 2020, BYD's darkest moment, the state was there with capital. The investigation concluded with the EU imposing additional tariffs on Chinese-built EVs in October 2024. BYD specifically received an additional tariff of 17% on top of the EU's standard import duty, for a combined rate of approximately 27.4%. SAIC received 35.3%. The logic was that without these tariffs, Chinese EVs would price European manufacturers out of their own market. The counterargument, which several European economists have made with some force, is that tariffs on affordable EVs are effectively a tax on European consumers' access to cheaper, cleaner transport. The average Chinese EV sold in Europe retails at around 32,000 euros. The average European manufactured EV remains above 50,000 euros. 1 in 4 EVs sold in the EU in 2024 was manufactured in China. Consumers were already voting with their purchasing decisions before the tariffs arrived. BYD's response to the tariff wall has been methodical. The company is building a manufacturing facility in Szeged, Hungary, designed for trial production beginning in early 2026 and with an annual capacity target of 300,000 units. Cars made in Hungary will not attract Chinese import tariffs. The strategy of building inside the fortress wall rather than trying to scale it has a certain elegant historical precedent. Japanese and Korean manufacturers employed exactly this approach in the 1980s when Western markets attempted to restrict their exports. The American market remains effectively closed to BYD's passenger vehicles. The Biden administration imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese-made EVs. Even the Inflation Reduction Act, designed to accelerate EV adoption, contains provisions that favor domestically produced vehicles, rules that BYD's production geography makes it essentially impossible to satisfy. BYD is present in the United States through its bus manufacturing facility in Lancaster, California, which employs over 750 workers and produces electric city buses, airport vehicles, and port equipment. But the American passenger car market, the largest in the world for premium vehicles, remains for now closed. Elon Musk, to his credit and perhaps his alarm, stated publicly that Chinese EV makers would pretty much demolish most competitors without trade barriers. It was an assessment delivered with the authority of someone who's been watching the same competitive intelligence reports as everyone else in the industry and drawing the same conclusions.
Part 10. Brazil, the Global South, and the Build Your Dream slogan that works somewhere else. 2023 was simultaneously BYD's worst year in Europe, sales representing barely 1.1% of the European EV market, and the year the company found something more valuable than a sales record: a narrative. In 2023, Brazilian President Lula da Silva, a former auto worker who understood viscerally what well-paying manufacturing jobs mean to working-class communities, had a conversation with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Ford had abandoned a car plant in the state of Bahia. The workers were unemployed. The factory was idle. Lula asked if any Chinese car companies might be willing to take it over. The offer went to BYD. They took it. The Brazilian press reported positively. The state of Bahia made a welcome video, and that same year, BYD captured 72% of the Brazilian EV market, surpassing Tesla as the best-selling pure electric brand, not just in Brazil, but globally. What worked in Brazil and in India, Indonesia, Thailand, and across the Global South was something that fell flat in Germany and the United Kingdom. The Build Your Dream slogan that European consumers found at best aspirational cheesy and at worst vaguely threatening resonated deeply in markets where the idea of a quality electric car being accessible to ordinary families was not an assumption, but a revelation.
Delivery videos from Indonesia show entire families arriving at dealerships dressed in their best clothes. Dealerships tie ribbons on the cars. People bring priests to bless their new vehicles. In some corners of the global south, receiving a BYD is not a consumer transaction. It is a milestone. It is the physical embodiment of a family's progress. Wang Chuanfu, the eighth child of an Anhui peasant farmer, the orphan who became a billionaire, participates personally in delivery ceremonies. He is present at the moments when families collect their new cars. Perhaps, as the source material for this story observes, he knows better than most what it means to arrive somewhere you once believed was unreachable. The Build Your Dream slogan is not, from that vantage point, a corporate marketing copy. It is autobiography. Part 11. The Bigger Picture. The Automotive Power Shift in Real Time. The British automotive market's history is a useful lesson in how power shifts happen in industries that look permanent. In 2001, Ford and Vauxhall together accounted for nearly a quarter of all new cars sold in the United Kingdom. They were so dominant that if you bought a car in that decade, you were statistically more likely than not to have bought one of them. By the 2010s, the Germans, Volkswagen, BMW, Audi, Mercedes, had leveraged the European Union's diesel tax incentive regime and their own engineering advantage in diesel engine technology to seize significant market share. Diesels accounted for more than half of all UK car registrations at the peak. Then, in 2015, a software engineer at Volkswagen, we assumed there was such a software engineer, though the company was not enthusiastic about naming names, installed defeat device software in millions of diesel vehicles, software designed to detect when a car was undergoing emissions testing and present artificially low emissions numbers. The Volkswagen emissions scandal, known with tabloid economy as Dieselgate, did not just damage Volkswagen, it reduced consumer trust in German diesel brands industry-wide. The era of German diesel dominance ended not with a graceful evolution, but with a corporate fraud and a series of raids on company headquarters by public prosecutors. Into that vacuum stepped not Ford and Vauxhall, who remained in their respective declining trajectories, but the Koreans. Hyundai and Kia, with their combination of competitive pricing, improving quality, and extended warranties, captured the opportunity the Germans had vacated. The government's car scrappage scheme, offering consumers up to £2,000 in exchange for older vehicles, provided the tailwind the Koreans needed, and they rode it with considerable skill. The cycle, as Charlene Gavathina, senior analyst at AutoTrader and the sharpest data reader in the room, articulated it cleanly. Dominance in the car world never lasts forever. No matter how big or how successful you are, something always comes along to shift the balance of power. The ZEV mandate, which requires all new cars sold in the UK to be electric by 2030, is that something arriving now. It is the reset. And China, having spent 15 years and more than $230 billion building the infrastructure, supply chain, technology, and manufacturing capacity for this specific reset, is positioned to exploit it in a way that no other national automotive industry is currently structured to match. The data carries an existential implication for brands with deep heritage and insufficient urgency. 39% of British consumers in AutoTrader research said they do not trust the quality of Chinese goods. 37% worried about customer service. 32% had safety concerns. These are real obstacles, and they are being eroded systematically by warranties that run to 7 years when European competitors offer 2 or 3, by quality materials that reviewers consistently describe as comparable to or better than established rivals, and by the simple reality that the BYD Sea Lion 7 drives, as the British journalist who tested one in the film that contributed to this report admitted freely, really very well. The concerns cluster most heavily among consumers over 55. Among buyers under 40, they are substantially weaker. The demographic pattern should be alarming to anyone building a business plan around those concerns remaining stable over the next decade.
Let me close with numbers because this story deserves an honest accounting.
BYD's 2024 revenue, $107 billion. Tesla's 2024 revenue, $97.7 billion. The first time in a Chinese car company out-earned the company that essentially created the modern electric vehicle category. BYD's 2024 global vehicle deliveries, 4.27 million new energy vehicles, including hybrids and EVs. Tesla's 2024 deliveries, 1.79 million, representing the first annual sales decline in Tesla's history. In 2025, BYD delivered 2.25 million pure battery electric vehicles. Tesla delivered 1.64 million, a difference of over 600,000 units and growing. BYD's overseas sales in 2025 exceeded 1 million units for the first time, a 150% increase from the year before. European sales in December 2025 were up 229.7% year-on-year. In Spain alone, BYD's European sales soared from 3,801 units in all of 2024 to 15,857 in 2025. The tariff wall is slowing them, it is not stopping them. And here's the data point that I find most clarifying, stripped of all narrative. Wang Chuanfu's stated goal in 2008, when he was a newly minted billionaire watching Warren Buffett take a 10% stake in his company, was for BYD to become the largest automobile manufacturer in the world by 2025. He was 2 years early. The man born into poverty in Anhui, orphaned at 15, who built a company in a rented workshop with 40,000 borrowed dollars, who was laughed at by Elon Musk and dismissed by the Western automotive press, who survived near bankruptcy in 2019 by pouring 8 billion yuan into research instead of cutting costs. That man now runs the world's biggest electric vehicle manufacturer, operating in over 70 countries across 6 continents, employing 900,000 people, with a product range that extends from a $10,000 city car to a $200,000 floating SUV with a drone on the roof. Charlie Munger, in what may be the most accurate assessment ever offered of another person's character and its consequences, described Wang Chuanfu's older brother, the farmer who gave up his own ambitions to put his orphaned younger brother through school, as a hero, and described what Wang Chuanfu had built as a miracle. The miracle is real. The disruption is real. The question the Western automotive industry should be asking, and asking urgently given that it probably has fewer years than it imagines to formulate an answer, is not whether BYD is competitive. The answer to that question is visible in every sales chart for the last 3 years. The question is, what do you do when the student has not just surpassed the teacher, but has started building things the teacher never imagined, at prices the teacher would have called impossible, for customers the teacher never knew it was losing? The man from Anhui has a head start. This has been Africa Daily's Cold Fusion Investigations feature on BYD. I'm your host, and I will see you next time.